Governments tighten their grip on the media, claiming to fight fake news. But is it actually silencing dissent? In this video, we dissect the battle for information. We'll expose laws masquerading as shields against misinformation, while unmasking echo chambers built by traditional media that serve their own agendas. Because a free press is the lifeblood of democracy. Stay tuned, and together, let's break the chains of control and amplify the voices that matter most. Legacy media and echo chambers. For decades, newspapers, TV broadcasts, and even radio news were our trusted window to the world. These sources, known as legacy media, held immense power in shaping public perception and discourse. But in the face of a diversified media landscape, a troubling truth comes out. Legacy media can often become echo chambers, amplifying certain narratives while muffling others. To understand it better, you can think of it as a maze, walls of curated stories, built by editorial decisions and economic pressures, guide our understanding of events. These walls, often influenced by the financiers and political leanings of media outlets, can limit our exposure to real and different viewpoints. Some say legacy media serves as a necessary filter, protecting us from misinformation. Others argue it acts as a gatekeeper, controlling the flow of information and silencing uncomfortable truths. This tension lies at the heart of the echo chamber issue. Who decides what stories get told and whose voices get heard? Financial influences. This is the maze of narratives we talked about. Now, let's shine a light on the shadow lurking at its corners. Money. Financial interests often cast a long, invisible hand over legacy media, shaping what stories get told and how they're told. Let's explore how this happens. Advertising dollars rule the roost. There are some advertisers who work as the puppeteers pulling the strings. Their financial contributions heavily influence which stories get prioritized, as outlets chase eyeballs and ad revenue. This can lead to a sensationalized reporting, neglecting important but less marketable issues. Corporate sponsors sing their own tune. When media conglomerates own both news outlets and corporations, a conflict of interest arises. Coverage might get sanitized to avoid upsetting powerful sponsors, leading to self-censorship and a sanitized version of reality. The subscription trap. Preaching to the choir. Many legacy media outlets rely on subscription models, catering to their existing audience base. This is exactly what can create echo chambers, where news always surprisingly goes with the pre-existing biases of readers, further limiting exposure to real and different viewpoints. The consequences of these financial influences are hard to deal with. The most obvious is underrepresentation of marginalized voices. Issues affecting less commercially attractive demographics may get sidelined, perpetuating social and economic inequalities. Because in the end, relationships between media and corporations can lead to uncritical coverage of their activities, all while hindering public accountability. You'd thought we were done by now. But the maze holds another hidden passage, and that is the cozy corridors of political alliances. Legacy media outlets and political entities often share a dance, a tango of talking points and agendas that can leave objectivity gasping for air. Let's peek behind the curtain. Some media outlets openly align themselves with specific political ideologies, acting as mouthpieces for those parties' agendas. This means news gets filtered through a partisan lens, prioritizing stories that support their chosen side and downplaying those that don't. Also, politicians dangle exclusive interviews and press access like carrots, rewarding outlets that toe the line. This quid pro quo dynamic can lead to self-censorship, with journalists hesitant to ask tough questions for fear of losing crucial access. In the end, politicians and pundits morph into commentators, and journalists morph into political advisors. This constant exchange blurs the lines between reporting and advocacy, making it difficult to discern genuine news from thinly veiled spin. The consequences of these political alliances are sadder than you might think. We aren't free anymore. Because when viewers perceive news as biased, they lose faith in its credibility. And everything looks like a manufactured reality because news becomes a tool for shaping public opinion rather than forming it, leading to a distorted understanding of real-world issues. Government actions under the guise of combating fake news. The war on fake news has become a rallying cry for governments worldwide, often masking attempts to control the narrative and muzzle dissent. While combating misinformation is important, the cloak of fake news can easily become a weapon wielded against independent media and critical voices. The biggest example of this is Hungary's Media Pluralism Act, as it grants the government sweeping powers to fine and shutter media outlets deemed biased or posing a threat to national security. Critics see it as a tool to silence critical coverage of Prime Minister Viktor Orban's increasingly authoritarian regime. And then we have the problem of content censorship under the guise of national security. In India, the Information Technology Act empowers the government to block online content deemed inflammatory or likely to disturb public tranquility. This broad definition's been used to silence journalists reporting on government corruption and even human rights abuses. Another bone-chilling example is algorithmic manipulation and state-run disinformation. China's Great Firewall restricts access to international media and controls domestic platforms through content filtering algorithms. Also, state-run media outlets churn out pro-government narratives, drowning out critical voices and creating an echo chamber of propaganda we mentioned earlier. Across the world, governments are increasingly seeking to regulate social media platforms, demanding removal of fake news, or imposing stringent reporting requirements. This can create a chilling effect, discouraging users from sharing sensitive information and encouraging self-censorship. And it's not about the user sitting behind the screen. It's also about the journalists that are being continuously targeted with legal threats and harassment. Journalists who expose government wrongdoing often face intimidation tactics. Legal harassment, trumped-up charges, and arbitrary detention are just some of the tools used to silence them. For example, award-winning Philippine journalist Maria Ressa faces multiple court cases, widely seen as retaliation for her critical reporting on President Rodrigo Duterte's administration. These are the few of the many dangers of governments exploiting the fake news label to control the media landscape, and the consequences are dire as critical voices are muzzled, leading to a homogenized public discourse and stifling open debate. Press Freedom Index. But how widespread is this issue? To understand the scope of the battle for free press, let's turn to the global watchdogs like Reporters Without Borders, who carefully compile the Press Freedom Index. It's a canary in the coal mine, measuring the levels of oxygen, in this case, freedom of expression, across 180 countries. The closer to the bottom, the thinner the air, the more choked the flow of information. It's a sobering assessment that paints a sad picture. 1 in 3 journalists work in a country deemed problematic or worse for press freedom. Countries like China, Egypt, and Turkmenistan sit firmly in the bottom ranks. Their rankings are a proof to the pervasive censorship, legal harassment, and physical threats faced by journalists. In China, the Great Firewall suffocates dissent, while Egypt's draconian laws and arbitrary arrests make independent reporting a perilous act. Even established democracies like Hungary and India show worrying declines, with laws weaponized against critical voices and journalists facing increasing pressure from powerful interests. The consequences of these rankings are not confined to a single country. When one canary stops singing, the air quality worsens for everyone. A silenced press in one corner of the world creates an information vacuum, allowing misinformation and propaganda to flourish, jeopardizing global discourse and undermining democratic values. Impact on public discourse. When certain voices are not allowed to speak up, it's like hearing the same things over and over. It's not a real conversation anymore. It's like everyone agreeing on the same ideas. This makes it hard to talk about important and complicated things because some viewpoints are not heard. So this is why many people don't trust traditional media these days, and they prefer independent sources. There's a group called the Trusted News Initiative, where big media and tech companies team up to control what people hear and limit other viewpoints. They use censorship laws, claiming it's to stop hate speech, but it often restricts independent thinking. People are turning away from mainstream media because they feel it's not honest or open to different opinions. The Trusted News Initiative shows how big media is working together to keep control and suppress competition, especially independent voices. Many people trust local news more than big networks. Some polls show that only a small percentage of people trust mainstream media. People want more diversity and connection, so they prefer getting news from local sources. The Trusted News Initiative is a symbol of how big media tries to control what people believe and suppress independent voices. It also shows how the media often supports powerful interests and globalism, which worries a lot of people. During events like January 6, when the media seemed to coordinate their messages, many people started seeing mainstream media as a threat to democracy. Half of Americans think news organizations intentionally mislead them. The media's handling of the pandemic, where they seem to support big pharma, also made people skeptical. Topics like excess deaths, the Wuhan lab leak theory, vaccine reactions, and different pandemic approaches challenge the mainstream narrative and make people trust them even less. Looking back, it's clear that during the pandemic, some political leaders didn't follow the rules they set, and many public officials ended up working for companies like Moderna and Pfizer. This has made people question the information controlled by the media during that time. President Biden's top medical advisor talks about the importance of trusted messengers, leading to a big campaign involving TikTokers, YouTubers, and celebrities to promote COVID vaccination. The campaign tries to reach different demographics and cultural groups, using various styles like hip-hop, humor, irony, and even some sexy undertones. However, as time goes on, people start questioning the over-the-top nature of the campaign, especially considering the large amount of money spent. As statistics show the loss of young lives and concerns about the vaccine's effectiveness and risks from experts at places like Harvard and Stanford, skepticism grows. There's also worry about media coordination to silence dissenting voices, whether in academia or entertainment. The truth is in front of us, and we can see how legacy media is taking unprecedented measures to silence dissent. The big question is why media organizations worldwide seem to go with the pharmaceutical industry, working to crush independent voices and prevent challenging the propaganda. The idea is that legacy media acts more like a mouthpiece for powerful interests than investigating corruption or excess deaths. This means that legacy media always works with powerful interests, stopping different perspectives and dissenting voices from getting through. The unsolved problem. Stopping journalists also means big and powerful groups control what information everyone gets. It's like a carefully picked menu instead of having a lot of choices. This can make people believe things that might not be true, just because those in power want them to think that way. When people can't trust the news and are scared to share their thoughts, it creates bigger problems. Everyone starts doubting what they hear and becomes unsure about everything. This makes it really difficult to have meaningful conversations, and people may stop caring about important issues. Also, if only some ideas are allowed and others are pushed away, it leads to a twisted way of understanding things. Lies can spread easily, and everyone starts believing things that might not be true. This creates a lot of division in society, making it hard for people to talk to each other. We've seen the labyrinth of media manipulation, witnessed the chilling grip of censorship, and felt the echoes of a poisoned public discourse. But in this labyrinth, there's not just darkness, but also the flickering light of courage and resistance. Journalists, independent voices, and everyday citizens like you and me hold the power to break free from these echo chambers and reclaim the marketplace of ideas. This is not just about saving the media, it's about saving ourselves. A free press is not a luxury, it's the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. It's the shield against misinformation, the engine of informed debate, and the foundation of progress. In a time when trust is fading, we face a decision. Do we stick with carefully crafted stories and controlled messages, or do we embrace a world of diverse thoughts? Independent media is bravely standing up against strict censorship. The answer isn't in computer programs or meetings, but in the heart of our democracy. Are we, the guardians of information and defenders of truth, willing to let different opinions be silenced? Will we support those who speak independently, even when faced with strong censorship? It's up to us, and the future of our democracy depends on the tune we choose to sing.